Welcome into this week's episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. My name is Matt Kirchner, and this week we are live on location in Racine, Wisconsin. Racine, home to the most amazing Kringles in the planet, for those of you in the know. And Racine also home to what I would say is one of the most beautiful technical college campuses in all of the United States of America. That, of course, being the Racine campus of Gateway Technical College, right on the beautiful shores of Lake Michigan. Racine is also home this week to the annual conference of the NCATC, the National Coalition of Advanced Technology Centers, around a really cool topic and a really cool theme we are going to talk about in just a minute with this week's guest. And that individual is the Chief Executive Officer and the Executive Director of NCATC, Mr. J. Craig McAtee. So Craig, I'm going to tell you this. You are an absolute prognosticator. I'm going to tell you, we were together, and we were talking about this morning at Automate in Detroit a year and a half ago. And we were in the Fanick Education Pavilion, as a matter of fact, where we were live streaming on YouTube the whole week. And I don't know if you remember this, but at the very end of that podcast, you said, Matt, I am going to see you in 2024 in Wisconsin at Gateway Technical College for our annual conference. And here we are a year and a half later having this conversation. So great to have you back on the Tech Ed Podcast.
Thank you so much.
I know you, and most of our audience, both in the room and on the podcast, know you as the incredible leader of NCATC. And you are that. But before this time in your current role, you had an incredible career in manufacturing. You're a product in your own right of a technical community college education. And then, of course, you went on to earn your engineering degree. I'm not sure how many people know about the Craig McAtee before this time at NCATC. So tell us a little bit about how you got there, kind of pre-2000-ish.
And I know that we did this, you and I, and your background very similar to mine.
Indeed,
we
it is.
Kindred spirits. So, in a brief nutshell, the first 25 years of my life in the 20th century, I was an engineer and a plant manager, a global e-commerce guy for a major international manufacturing company in Cleveland. Some of you may know the name. It's Swagelok. And I hope there's a couple of hands that go up and say, yeah, I know that company. But the only competitor in the world would be Parker Hannifin and Eaton Corporation with those kind of fittings and valves, and So I was really loving what I did there, but I needed a change after 25 years, and found my way into my executive MBA because I just needed more business sense along with the engineering, and got hired for about a year and a half with the MEP in Cleveland. It was Camp then. Now it's Magnet. Some of you may know that group, and I was involved with some DoD. We reinvented the supply chain for some, planes that were sitting in a graveyard and needed wing gaskets so they could get in the air again. That was my first experience with reverse engineering, a team of engineers that I had. We went to the Pentagon. I never thought I'd be in there, but walking through there was fun. But midway through that year and a half at the MEP, somebody knocked on my door and said, we'd love to have you come and run the Advanced Technology Center at Cuyahoga Community College. So I had breakfast with them. Long story short, got hired in 2000, went in and retrofitted everything, went out and asked for, funding from Parker Hannifin, Swagelok, Eaton, you name it. And we got like $4 million in about 2 weeks. Wow. I had amazing mentorship from the president there, Dr. Jerry Sue Thornton. A lot of you might know her. She took a business guy out on the road and said, you write these one-pagers, and this is what we're going to do. I'm going to introduce you to the CEO of each of these companies, and then you're going to pitch. You're going to pitch your what you need that money for. And within about a month and a half, we had $4 million committed to that. So that was a really cool change.
Absolutely. Well, and that speaks to, you look at the banners outside of the conference this week and just the incredible menagerie of different suppliers and different supporters that you've got, different sponsors. Really, really impressive. You're having an incredible impact on the world of technical education and on the world of advanced manufacturing. And I wanted to make sure that our audience recognized that you do have that incredible background in advanced manufacturing. Think about reverse engineering back in our days of manufacturing, right? And now you think about things like 3D scanning, and you think about additive and all the different ways that we're able to reverse engineer products in this day and age. It's an incredible world and an incredible age that we're living in, and so much of it revolves around all the automation things that we're hearing about, all the artificial intelligence things that we're hearing about. And I know that's a huge theme for the week that you're having here. I love, by the way, this theme, this whole idea of human skills amplified by automation and artificial intelligence. So first of all, was that your idea? I mean, did that come out of your head? That is incredible, that theme.
Well, here's the deal. I want to give credit to my board of directors and all the folks that are here, but my board of directors is amazing. We do a lot of sparring about wordsmithing things, but
Right.
yeah, I said, let's make sure we have the most emerging technology theme that we can every year. So yes, it evolved.
Awesome. Yeah. So I love the theme. Let's talk about that. You've got this beautiful wordsmith whole idea of human skills, right?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about amplified. So we're not replacing humans with AI or automation. We are amplifying what they're able to do. So just kind of wax with us a little bit on that topic and tell us what influenced that theme.
And obviously 25 years in this side of the business, workforce development is like, okay, 2 decades or more. And you see trends, right, Matt? So you see that no matter what it is, whether it's Lean Six Sigma or green technologies or anything like 3D additive, AR, VR, all these technologies that we are in the midst of are just more tools in the human toolkit, and so there's nothing special other than they're new and they're evolving and emerging. So I just think it's really always going to be that case. And we just want to make sure that, obviously, those of you who probably work with some of those manufacturing innovation institutes like America Makes and NextFlex and ARM and all those folks we work with as well are on the cutting edge of research and development in all these specialized fields. And there's 2 new ones that are coming on board for chips and semiconductors and AI in the next year. They're actually performing as we speak. So we just keep up with all that.
So it's just as a coincidence, I'm actually sitting here this morning, right at this moment, missing my meeting for the organization that is trying to bring one of those AI institutes to Southeast Wisconsin. So you ranked just a little bit ahead. I had to let those folks know this morning.
Wow.
Sorry, I won't be on that steering committee meeting, but
Hey.
way better to be here in so many ways. And as we think about artificial intelligence, we think about automation, we think about the institutes, we think about all of the innovation that's happening across the economy. And now you get to gather here with all these subject matter experts in these areas and some of the greatest companies in manufacturing sitting in the room with us here this morning, especially when we start thinking about how manufacturing is evolving. So you've had panels, you've had speeches, you've had industry tours, you've spent time at Gateway. I've got to believe there are a couple of those like, oh my goodness, aha, wow moments that occurred to you over the course of the last couple of days. What have you learned so far in the conference?
Well, I always learn from the presentations and, of course, the tours. What I love is Richard Amon from College Lake County is on my board, and he brought us a panel from amazing experts from IBM and quantum research industries here yesterday, and I was dubious. I'm like, this is PhD level stuff, right? Well, guess what? It blew my doors off because they were absolutely able to get most of that high level stuff in layman's terms, technician-oriented terms, because you think about all this research and development and engineering, and for sure everybody here should remember that 721 model. For every PhD doing research and development, there are at least 2 engineers, but for every 2 engineers, we need 7 technicians to support them and actually do the maintaining and the setup and the running of these systems. So they were on spot with the fact that they were focused on the workforce for technician level folks, where you can actually take an electrician or an HVAC specialist that's working there and just bolt on some of these new quantum needs, and they've got a whole nother career.
And I think just some of the challenges that go along with how does AI change the world of a technician, right? I mean, if I'm a data scientist, if I'm an AI scientist, I'm dealing with complex data and algorithms and large language models and all the, I mean, it's not easy to understand, but it's easy to at least wrap our brain around what that job might look like. When it comes to a technician, so many changes in terms of interacting with artificial intelligence, applied AI, all the smart sensors and smart devices we have on our equipment now, gathering all this data in real time, sending it up to the cloud, and then what do we do with that data? And then, if I'm buying a machine tool, I'm buying a robot loaded up with so many smart sensors and gathering all this data. And my friend Paul Aiello, who's in the audience, talks all the time about robots that predict their own future failure and order their own replacement parts. I mean, oh my goodness, that's the world we're living in. But think about how that changes a technician's job and how it changes the world of work. So I hate the term skills gap, right? Because it's become so cliche, and what does it even mean? But when we think about this lack or shortage of talent, especially in advanced manufacturing, and we think about the future of AI and automation and how it's going to change, What's your sense of that? How, is this going to take the skills gap and make it even more of a challenge because we have so much to learn? Is it going to augment the work of our technicians in a way that is going to make their job maybe a little bit narrower and give them some tools to do that work? How's that going to change in the future?
I'd like to think I'm a futurist in a lot of ways. I believe in the term that I've adopted. My wife does not care for it at home, but if it ain't broke, break it. Because I think everything in the world could be done better. It really can. So the continuous improvement, right, Matt? So that's really part of what the thing is with AI. If you don't adopt new technology and integrate it in your operations or your daily life, you're going to be left behind. And I think that we look, 30 years ago, the internet or whatever it was, I've lost track. People were dubious about that. People have been dubious about all things of technology. But if you don't start using it and understanding it and integrating it in your daily life or what your job is, you're going to be left behind. You're going to be obsolete. And the Microsoft group was here. They're a great sponsor this week for us, and they actually did a presentation on how they're building out training for faculty and instructors to get a baseline. And their goal is to get every state, starting with Wisconsin, by the way, all the faculty and all the colleges trained on base level AI use.
Well, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. Mary Snap, who's the Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Microsoft, actually joined us on the Tech Ed podcast a few short weeks ago to talk about it. And I'm sure it's come up this week. But just to put it into perspective, Microsoft is investing, literally 10, 20, 15 miles from where we're sitting right now. They're investing $3.3 billion with a B, $1 billion in a data center and all of these educational initiatives with Gateway Technical College, with the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee Connected Systems Institute to upskill not just our current students, but our current workforce around artificial intelligence. It's a really, really exciting time to be doing that kind of work and a good time to be thinking about if it ain't broke, then break it. But I think we really do in many ways need to break the model. We need to break the model in manufacturing. We need to break the model in education, or at least change in some cases the way that we're educating our students. I know you and I share a lot of common opinions about this particular topic. When we think about that, though, and we think about artificial intelligence, we talk to a lot of educators who know what's coming. They know they need to be thinking about it. In many cases, education is leading industry, we see, in terms of the adoption of artificial intelligence. But I know we still have a lot of our educators who are saying, okay, I get it. This is going to change everything, but how is it going to change everything? Do you have a couple of use cases that you're familiar with that you could share with our audience about how AI is going to change the world of education?
Well, I think the bottom line is people have to understand that it's really another tool, and it really isn't. Like, I remember in the 70s when I was hired on, the owner of my company, Swedlock, said, I learned the first Christmas he came with bonus checks to all 30 or 40 job shops. Put your calculators away. He doesn't want to see you using your calculators. He doesn't believe in them. Everything should be done the old way, with an abacus.
Right.
But anyhow, that was stuck in my head. It's like that. He was really a great businessman, but he didn't understand technology changes. To me, professors, faculty, and instructors, if they're not adopting the fact that students and faculty should be using AI as a tool, they're going to be left behind. I will tell you that in industry, A3, we've been developing for almost 2 years some industry recognized AI courses for industrial maintenance. And one of the things that sticks with my mind, it's an ex-Microsoft guy that's developing it with A3, is Cheetos. How many people like Cheetos? I do. I had a bag last night. But the corn comes in, and basically it's variable, the moisture level, the content level, whatever. And it takes humans to dial in those machines to process it and make it the right consistency so the Cheeto comes out like it should. And so they've adopted AI models and large language models to adopt those human interaction changes to actually be automated so that the operators can do a better job and a faster job of making that happen. So that's a use case that can be applied to. But I think customer service, obviously processes in colleges and industry, anything that with data analytics, as you said, CRMs, anything that can be done to augment answers quicker to your customer, whether it's your student, your industry, or whatever. AI is going to be part of that, and is now. I mean, just think about, we've been using AI with Amazon orders for decades, right? It suggests that you should have something in your mind.
Right.
Yeah, so it's everywhere.
Absolutely, it's everywhere. And we think about the world of education, and I actually alluded to this a minute ago, Craig. First of all, leave it to Craig McAtee to find a way to tie artificial intelligence to Cheetos. I mean, that's a true gift that you got there. It's the first time I've heard that one, but that was pretty good. So, in this world of education, and I'm part of an organization called the Tech Ed Media Group. Actually, it's the parent company of the podcast that we're on right now. I did a survey this summer, went out to, hundreds and hundreds of people doing great things in the world of manufacturing, primarily education, healthcare, and asked a whole series of questions. Actually, produced a report. We'll link that up in the show notes. And one of the things that we found as a result of that work, and I just alluded to this, is that education is actually in a lot of ways quite a bit ahead of the world of industry and manufacturing, and where we see especially our higher educators, our technical colleges, community colleges, and our universities starting to figure out how AI is going to transform the work that they're doing. They're actually ahead of industry. And so for our industrial employers that might be in the audience, if you're trying to figure out what comes next, tie into those technical educators. I gave several references to Gateway Technical College and the work that they're doing here in Southeast Wisconsin. Another great institution is Waukesha County Technical College and WCTC. First certificate programs in the country, I believe, in artificial intelligence. First associate degree in the country, and now standing up a center for applied AI to work with all of their industrial employers on how do we take these concepts and put them to work in the world of manufacturing and in the world of business. One of my favorite examples that we use in one of our ed tech companies is it's now to the point where it can predict cash flow or EBITDA 14 months out. We're sitting here September. We know November of 2025 how that business is going to perform all the way through. And as a result of that, now think about all the risk you can afford to take in a business, knowing exactly how much cash flow is going to be created. So all these incredible use cases and applications for artificial intelligence. So on this whole idea of education and industry, education leading industry, but also knowing that these partnerships are so very, very important. You've spent time in manufacturing. You've spent time with tons and tons of technical educators. I know you've seen the very best practices of how to build partnerships with industrial employers and vice versa. But especially, Craig, in this age of automation and artificial intelligence, what advice do you have for the educators in the audience on that topic?
Well, to me, it's just fundamental blocking and tackling, right? You've got to understand that education speak is not the same as industry and business speak. And then we've got to throw in the fact that a lot of us live and die by grants to help get us jump-started. And so there's government speak too, right? So you've got a three-legged stool, and a lot of you probably live this and know this, but I'm just going to say it out loud. If you can understand how to translate between each one of those three legs to each other, and then bring the industry close to you so that they learn from what you need, try to get it down to a level that they understand in process terminology, and the same vice versa with industry. Build that relationship based on not having them be a vendor to you, but more as your client. Industry is your number one customer. And I remember 10, 12, 15 years ago, I was in Florida and presenting that fact. And I turned around to look at my slide, and there was pretty much all faculty at that time. And I felt like 42 darts in my back because the faculty in that room did not agree that industry was a customer and so was the student, even though that's the product. They really believed at that point that the students were there to be lectured to as the sage on the stage approach, So we have to really understand how to make sure the educators and workforce development professionals linked with industry. That's why we call everyone here this week our strategic partner. They are not vendors to us. They are our partners. And if we keep in touch with them on a regular basis, and we heard something yesterday from Montez King, and we agree, minimum, changing the curriculum should be every year, minimum. And that's the BUILT model that we've built with CORD out here with NSF funding. That is a business and industry leadership team replacing the 20th century approach of advisory committees. That's another. But Montez took it another level yesterday. He said every 6 months. So we've got to keep up with the trends at industry. And I think keeping them on a regular schedule, what BUILT says, and we believe this, say to industry, we want for any given program only 6 to 8 hours of your time every year. And here's how we're going to use it. 2 or 3 hours are going to just syncing up with what we've done and having you tell us what future trends are. 2 hours are going to be based on specific program curriculum. And those 2 hours, you're going to rank the knowledge, skills, and abilities and certifications needed in our program. And we're going to go and crosswalk that back with our curriculum and make it happen. These are simple processes that if we adopt those across the spectrum here in the United States. We will have much more industry engagement and direction in what they need because they are our customer.
When we talk, Craig, to industrial employers who, quote, complain about maybe the talent they're getting from their high school or from their community college, and then you say, well, what are you saying at your advisory board when you go? They're like, advisory board? It's like, well, okay, if you're not sitting on the advisory board, if you're not giving those, in some cases even 2 or 3 hours, but certainly 6 or 8, which in terms of solving the biggest problem that manufacturers and industrial employers have, 6 or 8 hours isn't too much time to give every single year. But if you're not even sitting on that advisory board, that's a great place to start. And if you're wondering why you're not getting the talent, it's the people serving on the advisory board, bringing pizza to the students, speaking at the career days, welcoming people into their manufacturing plants to show them what the new world of manufacturing is all about. And if you're not doing those things, then just, shut up and go back to work, because you're not doing the kinds of things that need to be done in order to create partnerships. On this topic of partnerships, one of the greatest industrial and education partnerships I've seen created, Mike Bigley is one of them. He's the superintendent of the Whitehall School District in Western Wisconsin. Has this rock solid partnership with Ashley Furniture, the largest furniture manufacturer in the world. But here's what Mike Bigley, the superintendent of that school district, said to me. He said, check the agendas at the door. He said, to your earlier point, education people don't necessarily speak the language of industry. Yep. Industry people don't necessarily speak the language of education. And so that's okay. Recognize that you don't speak each other's language. Don't pretend to. Right. And then recognize that you may have different political agendas. I mean, it doesn't matter. If it's about students, if it's about securing the American dream for the next generation of STEM and workforce talent, we're all on the same team. Let's just figure that out. Right. And so what Mike has done, by the way, on this whole topic of AI at this school district is created this whole learning program, an emerging technology lab all around what we call edge to cloud, smart sensors, smart devices at the edge, cloud computing, at the cloud, and AI and machine learning. And then that whole continuum from sensor to control system to network to ISP to the cloud to whatever application they're using, whether it's, Data Factory, Azure, whatever. And he has students as early as freshman year of high school that are now understanding this better than a lot of the technical and community college and university students that we talk to. Yep. So our message to those in, post-secondary is, to your point about changing curriculum, how does your program need to look? Yeah. How does it need to look when the students that you're getting already know all this stuff? And how are you going to modify and morph what you're teaching, whether it's an automation program, a healthcare program, a CNA program? I mean, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Wherever they're going after high school, we've got to really think in higher ed about how we catch up in some ways and make sure we're staying ahead of what these students are learning in high school. Thinking about staying ahead requires us really to look into the future. We started this discussion talking about your ability to be a prognosticator, to predict that you and I would be sitting here right here this day, a year and a half later. I want you to talk a little bit about some of the trends that you are seeing in the world of technical education and industry, specifically as to artificial intelligence and automation. What are some of those future trends you have your eyes on?
If we look at the mothership, as I call it, of community colleges in our nation, it's the American Association of Community Colleges, okay, and they're in D.C., and we are an affiliated council of that. So they rely on us as affiliated council in the fields that we're talking about in manufacturing and technology, best cases from the field, so that they can then put that up to the policymakers that they work with and lobby in DC, but also stand up pilots across the country in AI, in cybersecurity, in a lot of things that are doing what we do, but they rely on us to make that happen. They've got a Dell Intel cohort right now in AI that we're working on. I have a meeting next Wednesday with them. I asked Microsoft if they wanted to join, and they said they'd love to. So we're building those things out, and those things are showing how industry is using AI in the classroom. And I think the real good trends there is we also had a semiconductor session at the Workforce Development Institute last January with AACC. And we had 120 folks in there, presidents, vice presidents, deans from the colleges, but we had Intel, we had Samsung, we had 4 or 5 other chip makers in the room for 3.5 hours. And what we were doing is distilling what they were needing versus what the programs at the colleges were doing. And coupled with the CHIPS Act and all this money that's coming from that, we are now working on level 2 this year. And I think the key thing with that is the best practices were recorded. Now we know a list of colleges in Arizona and Ohio and Texas that are the leading people in those semiconductor programs for technicians. And those are things that we do on a regular basis as catalog and then promote and amplify across the nation with our members. Here, if you're going to start something up, don't reinvent the wheel, right? Don't reinvent the wheel ever, because you're wasting your time. Springboard from Clover Park in Washington on the great work that they're doing on IoT, et cetera. But we learned, and I asked this question of every industry group, how do you feel about the 5 major principles of automation being needed in your program? And I asked that of the chips makers, and I said, hydraulics, pneumatics, electronics, mechanical systems, and PLCs. That's the 5 major disciplines of mechatronics, right, Matt? And a lot of, where I travel, a lot of certain communities or states or whatever, in industry too, they don't use the word mechatronics, even though they talk about mechanical electrical systems run by a computer. Well, if we can get people over that hurdle and say, look, mechatronics is here to stay, and that's the jumping off point to Industry 4.0. Most people are doing something like that, but they don't call it that. That's fine if you don't call it that, but you should have all 5 of those. And industry always says, if you can give me a student that knows mechatronics technology, that's 60% minimum of what we need them to know. So that's a trend that we put out there a lot.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, now we think about, in addition to the 5 disciplines you mentioned, the robotics and automation side, and then add to that the artificial intelligence and machine learning side, at least in terms of how we apply it in manufacturing. And now you have just the perfect portfolio of all of those technologies are the fundamental technologies of manufacturing. And you're exactly right. In this world of Industry 4.0, or what I like to call Industry Infinity 0.0, that's exactly the way that we should be thinking about it. Appreciate you mentioning the Chips and Science Act. Of course, we had Senator Todd Young from the great state of Indiana on the podcast about a year and a half ago. He, of course, in association with Senator Chuck Schumer, sponsored the Chips and Science Act and was talking about all of the investments that were going to be made in education and in manufacturing. And you're right in the middle of seeing those investments being put to work, speaking to the incredible value that if we're investing in the right areas, that our federal government can play in terms of advancing manufacturing into the future. You mentioned these partnerships with companies like Dell and Intel and Microsoft. I mean, you could shoot a little higher, Craig. I mean, I don't know if that's something you're thinking about, but those are those are all phenomenal partnerships, as well as we think about some of these emerging technologies, whether it's chips, whether it's semiconductors, whether it's certainly automation and now artificial intelligence. Really, really important that we've got those on our radar and we're thinking about those future trends. All of those trends are going to play into the workforce, right? So let's think about, I spent, as you know, 23 years in manufacturing, chief operating officer of one company, chief executive officer of 2 other ones, and before getting into the education world now about 9 years ago. And I saw firsthand the way that manufacturing careers change lives, right? You can start out sweeping the floor and end up running the company, pause anywhere along the line, and have a really awesome family sustaining, supporting career. And now we're in this age where people are saying, okay, artificial intelligence is here, automation is here. How do you think that changes the role of skilled technicians and skilled labor in the world of manufacturing?
Well, I mean, it's just like anything, like I've talked about earlier. It's like it isn't more tools in the toolkit to help you do a smarter approach to your job and be more efficient and effective more quickly than ever before. And again, you learn as it goes, and it's growing quickly. I remember putting automated statistical process control on our machines way back in the 80s, right? And we were doing all this stuff and recording by hand, but then we got some data collection things, and the SPC would tell you how things were in control with your sizing in your machine and how soon to adjust. Almost predictive, not quite. But back to the zero downtime that Fanucs had for many decades, that predictive and preventative analysis is huge and important for us to keep more efficient. And higher wage and higher tech skills is what we're always aiming for. If you learn more skills especially with automation and AI, then you're going to be more valuable and paid better, right? So I think it's really all about moving the bar up, like we always do, and those that don't understand that are still cutting chips on a Brown and Sharp screw machine. Yeah, there's some things that still need to be made that way, but there's a lot that don't.
Absolutely. So thinking about what the future of technology, in that case, machining, is going to look like, and yes, we will always have screw machines, but even screw machines now, if you walk into a manufacturing facility, a contract machining facility, or you mentioned, I used to do a lot of work with Daco actually, and they just had a whole scene before the Parker acquisition, had a whole sea of screw machines, and now we're putting smart sensors and smart devices on screw machines and doing all kinds of predictive analytics. So just to really shows us how the world of work is going to change over the course of time. You mentioned zero downtime by FANUC. Of course, that is the technology that predicts the future failure of the robot by measuring force and disturbances and temperature and moisture and humidity and all these kind of things, sending that information up to the cloud and then using those huge data sets to do all kinds of cool predictive analytics. It's interesting you bring that up because I was driving down here from my house just north of Milwaukee this morning. It's about a 45-minute drive. And the car that was in front of me for most of that drive, the license plate was ZDT, zero downtime. So I'm like, it's just another Celestine example of how this all comes together. Absolutely true story. And I don't tell the county sheriff's office this, but I actually have a photograph to prove that. So, so that is interesting that you bring all of those things up, Craig. Interesting. All the changes that are happening in education and in manufacturing both. I want to ask you this as our final question. Let's say we're turning the clock forward 10 years. Let's say that Craig McAtee and Matt Kirchner are sitting here doing another episode of the Tech Ed podcast a decade from now in the year 2034. In as much as so much of this is around STEM and technical education, how's the world of tech ed going to look different in 10 years?
Boy, Matt, that is a big question. And I know you kind of alluded to that early on. And I was like, how am I going to answer that kind of question? And I think one of there's many facets to the question to being answered, right? What I'd love to see, and I would predict and hopeful that there will be more CEOs from the colleges coming to our conference. We've got 2 or 3 this year, and it's wonderful because they are the few. I know them firsthand. They are truly the future leaders of their communities and their state in making really important things happen, not only with the curriculum and the faculty and the buildings that they need to do things in the right way to mimic what's going on in industry so they keep ahead of the curve, but finding the funding and the support to do that. So I think having CEOs more in attendance shows that everything we do in industry, whether it's education or business or government, you've got to have top leadership in the game and buying into what they need to do and supporting everybody below that's doing the work and making sure they have the funding and resources to do it. I'd also like to see a lot more younger folks here, and I think we're starting to turn the corner. If I get here 10 years from now, that would be a miracle, but I'm hopeful. But I also think we'll see some probably robots and some autonomous vehicles of all kinds. We'll probably have drones and things we haven't even thought about that are on display and sessions on that. I just think a lot of things with AI will be a huge part of what we do in the next 10 years, and it will be a lot of autonomous everything from systems to vehicles to even your notepads.
All really good predictions. Let's start with the idea of having more CEOs at an organization like this, right? In the manufacturing world, we called that going to the Gemba, right? The Gemba is the Japanese word in lean manufacturing for where the action is. If somebody's going to do a news report, they're going to the Gemba. Some would argue that coming to this conference for the Tech Ed podcast is going to the Gemba. We actually did an episode last year called Going to the Gemba, where we visited every CTE center around the entire state of North Dakota. Go to the Gemba, go where the action is. And so that invitation to our CEOs of all of our institutions of higher education, but especially our technical and community colleges, to come to a conference like this, to understand what's happening, boots on the ground, so that as we're planning the future of education, and 10 years from now, trust me, it is going to look way different than it does today, that we're ready for what that change is going to look like, and that we're prepared for it. I'm glad we prepared to have some time with Craig McAtee this morning. I'm glad that you joined us. Will you come back in 10 years? I'm going to hold you to that.
If I'm able, I will definitely be here.
All right, and we're gonna expect that both Holly and you come 10 years from now, and we'll sit down and do it again. We'll look back at how much has changed in the world of technical education during those 10 years. But in the meantime, Craig, such a pleasure to be with you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Matt, for everything.
And thank you for joining us for this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed and how much I learned from our discussion with Craig McAtee, the CEO, the Executive Director of the National Coalition of Advanced Technology Centers. We referenced a whole bunch of material on this episode of the Tech Ed Podcast, so check out the show notes. We will have all of that linked up in the show notes. You can find those at techedpodcast.com/McAtee. That is techedpodcast.com/MCA. TEE. When you're done with the show notes, check us out on social. We are all over social media. LinkedIn, we are on Facebook, we are on TikTok, we are on Instagram. Doesn't matter where you go for your social media, you will find the Tech Ed Podcast. And when you do, stop by, leave a comment, say hello. We would love to hear from you, and we would love to see you next week on our next episode of the Tech Ed Podcast. Until then, I am your host, Matt Kirchner. Thank you for being with us.